Now to an Eyewitness News investigation into what's essentially becoming homeless encampments on wheels. So-called Vanlords are renting out RVs to people who are now using them as their permanent residence.
New at 10, the Phoenix City Council is limiting medical care to homeless people in parks.
About an hour ago, after hours of discussion, the council approved the controversial ordinance that opponents believe will cost people's lives.
Something huge is happening across America, and almost no one is talking about it. In 2025, more than a dozen states are quietly pushing RV residents out, tightening laws, and clearing people from public spaces. This isn't about camping rules. It's a growing crisis forcing Americans into the shadows. Today, we expose the 16 states where this is happening. California has the largest RV dwelling population in the United States, with estimates ranging from 150,000 to over 200,000 people living in vehicles statewide. In 2025, enforcement escalated sharply after cities were granted broader authority to clear encampments and restrict vehicle habitation. Major metros like Los Angeles, San Diego, San Jose, and Oakland expanded overnight parking bans, length of stay limits, and no habitation vehicle codes. In Los Angeles alone, more than 60,000 encampment clearings were recorded annually, with many involving RVs. Housing costs are the primary driver of this crisis. Median rent exceeds $2,800 per month, while over 30% of households earn under $50,000 annually. RV living became a last resort survival strategy for seniors, disabled residents, and working families who could no longer afford traditional housing. In 2025, cities increasingly combined parking enforcement with towing authority, making displacement immediate and financially devastating. An RV tow can cost $3,000 to $10,000, instantly erasing a person's only shelter and security. Massive layoffs worsened displacement throughout the state. California lost over 300,000 tech and service jobs since 2023, pushing more people into vehicles while simultaneously criminalizing their presence on public streets. Many cities now require proof of residency or employment to access safe parking programs, effectively excluding the most vulnerable populations. The result is constant displacement, with people cycling between industrial zones, desert edges, and county borders without stable alternatives or pathways back to permanent housing. Florida enacted one of the most aggressive statewide public camping bans in the country, effective in 2024 and fully enforced throughout 2025. The law prohibits sleeping or camping on public property, including in vehicles, unless a city designates specific approved areas. RV dwellers now face fines up to $500 and mandatory relocation orders. Florida's RV homeless population surged as rents rose 25 to 30% since 2021, while wages lagged far behind housing costs. The state also experienced major layoffs across tourism, insurance, and construction sectors. Florida's property insurance crisis forced landlords to raise rents sharply, pushing retirees and fixed-income seniors into vans and RVs as their only affordable option. Unlike Western states with dispersed public lands, Florida offers extremely limited areas for legal vehicle camping. Municipal enforcement intensified dramatically in Tampa, Orlando, Miami-Dade, and Jacksonville. Police now routinely ticket RVs for sleeping in vehicles, even in industrial zones previously considered tolerable. Shelters are often full or inaccessible to couples, pet owners, or medically fragile individuals who cannot meet restrictive entry requirements. Florida reports that less than 30% of homeless shelter beds are available on any given night. In 2025, counties began coordinating enforcement across city lines, eliminating traditional safe migration zones. RV dwellers are increasingly forced onto rural highways or into private land arrangements they cannot afford, creating a relentless cycle of displacement without housing exits or stabilization opportunities. New York's RV homelessness is concentrated around New York City, Long Island, and upstate industrial corridors, where housing costs have become prohibitive. While New York guarantees a right to shelter, that system primarily serves individuals, not vehicle dwellers. RV residents are often denied entry due to vehicle ownership, pets, or family status that disqualifies them under existing shelter rules. In 2025, New York City expanded enforcement of sanitation, parking, and zoning codes, specifically targeting RVs. Vehicles can be ticketed for remaining parked longer than 24 to 48 hours, and sanitation violations can trigger immediate towing. The average RV tow and impound in NYC exceeds $4,500, effectively confiscating housing and belongings simultaneously. The state also saw devastating layoffs across finance, media, and healthcare administration sectors. New York lost approximately 250,000 jobs since 2022, while median rent surpassed $3,200 in NYC. RV living became a desperate fallback for laid-off workers who could not access affordable housing fast enough to prevent displacement. Suburban counties followed city policy, closing park and ride lots and rest areas to overnight use. Enforcement is often framed as quality of life improvement, but no equivalent increase in housing placements occurred. RV dwellers are pushed farther from job centers and public transit, increasing unemployment rates and accelerating long-term homelessness. The system criminalizes housing instability rather than creating pathways to stability and permanent shelter. Washington state saw a rapid rise in RV living after housing costs in Seattle and surrounding counties doubled over a single decade. In 2025, enforcement escalated following court decisions allowing cities to clear encampments regardless of shelter availability. Seattle, Tacoma, Everett, and Spokane expanded RV-specific parking bans and designated tow-away zones throughout residential and commercial areas. Washington DOT closed multiple highway rest areas to overnight parking, eliminating traditional refuge spots for vehicle dwellers. Towing costs often exceed $5,000, while impound storage accrues additional daily fees. Once an RV is towed, financial recovery becomes impossible for most residents living paycheck to paycheck. The state lost tens of thousands of tech and logistics jobs post-2023. King County alone reported over 40,000 layoffs, while median rent remained above $2,600 monthly. RVs became de facto affordable housing for displaced workers until enforcement systematically removed them. Safe parking programs exist, but serve only a small fraction of actual need, often requiring background checks, vehicle registration, and employment verification. Many RV dwellers fail to qualify due to documentation gaps or employment instability. The result is forced mobility, with people moving every 24 to 72 hours, unable to stabilize work schedules or maintain medical care, while still being counted as addressed in official enforcement statistics. Washington's approach prioritizes clearance over housing solutions, accelerating the transition from vehicle shelter to complete street homelessness without offering alternatives. Texas officially banned public camping statewide in 2021, but enforcement intensified dramatically in 2025 as cities expanded vehicle habitation enforcement protocols. Austin, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio increased RV sweeps near industrial zones and highway corridors. Texas cities frequently use obstruction or safety codes to justify immediate towing actions. Texas experienced significant layoffs across tech, energy services, and trucking logistics sectors. Despite lower average rents compared to coastal states, housing supply lagged population growth by hundreds of thousands of units. RV living rose sharply among working families priced out of apartments due to income requirements and credit screening. Unlike western states with accessible public lands, Texas offers extremely limited legal camping options. Overnight parking at rest areas is heavily restricted, and many counties criminalize sleeping in vehicles under local ordinances. RV dwellers are pushed into unincorporated zones without water, sanitation, or emergency services. Towing is often immediate and without warning. Recovery costs range from $2,500 to $7,000, effectively eliminating housing in a single enforcement action. Texas does not provide vehicle replacement assistance or alternative shelter placement. Once an RV is lost to impound, individuals typically enter street homelessness rather than traditional shelters due to strict rules, limited capacity, and incompatibility with families or medical needs. Texas enforcement prioritizes rapid clearance and visual management over housing solutions, converting temporary vehicle shelter into permanent displacement and accelerating the cycle of poverty and homelessness. Arizona has become a pressure release valve for housing displacement from California, Nevada, and Colorado. By 2025, Maricopa County alone recorded over 13,000 people living unsheltered, with a sharp rise in vehicle habitation. Phoenix rents increased roughly 40% since 2020, while wages in service, warehousing, and construction failed to keep pace. RV living became a survival strategy for laid-off workers, seniors on fixed incomes, and heat-vulnerable residents who could not safely sleep outdoors. In 2025, Arizona cities expanded enforcement using vehicle habitation, obstruction, and health code violations. Phoenix and Mesa now issue citations for sleeping in vehicles regardless of parking legality. After repeated notices, RVs are classified as abandoned and towed. Recovery costs often exceed $3,500, not including daily storage fees that accumulate rapidly. Arizona's extreme heat adds a lethal dimension to displacement. Temperatures above 110 degrees Fahrenheit make forced relocation dangerous and potentially deadly, yet enforcement continues year-round without consideration for weather conditions. Cooling centers often prohibit pets or personal vehicles, excluding many RV dwellers from accessing emergency relief. While Arizona has large amounts of public land, most Bureau of Land Management areas near cities are restricted or heavily patrolled. Job losses in construction and logistics since 2023 further increased financial instability. Without stable parking access, RV residents lose employment opportunities, healthcare continuity, and mail services. Arizona's approach prioritizes movement over solutions, turning temporary vehicle shelter into a rapid pipeline toward full-street homelessness. Colorado's RV homelessness grew rapidly as housing costs outpaced income growth along the Front Range corridor. By 2025, median rent in Denver exceeded $2,400 per month, while thousands of workers were laid off across tech startups, real estate, and tourism industries. RV living expanded among employed adults who could no longer qualify for apartments due to income thresholds or credit requirements. In response, cities strengthened enforcement rather than expanding housing access. Denver expanded its definition of unauthorized camping to include sleeping in vehicles, even when legally parked on public streets. Many municipalities imposed 72-hour parking limits, forcing constant relocation. Repeated violations triggered towing actions, with average recovery costs above $4,000, often exceeding the RV's actual resale value. Colorado's geography worsens displacement outcomes significantly. RV dwellers pushed out of cities migrate toward foothills, industrial corridors, or mountain towns where winter temperatures drop below 0 degrees. Cold exposure increases mechanical failures, medical emergencies, and fuel dependency that many cannot afford. Safe parking programs exist, but are capped and highly selective, serving only a small fraction of actual need. Many programs require proof of employment, vehicle insurance, and current registration. Documents often lost during displacement cycles. Colorado lost tens of thousands of jobs since 2023, shrinking program eligibility further. By criminalizing vehicle shelter without scaling housing supply, Colorado effectively converts working RV residents into unsheltered homeless individuals within months, not years, accelerating complete housing collapse. Oregon's RV homelessness expanded beyond Portland into Eugene, Salem, Medford, and coastal towns experiencing rapid rent increases. Rising rents, up more than 20% statewide since 2021, combined with layoffs in manufacturing, timber, and logistics, pushed many households into vehicles. RVs became transitional housing for people attempting to stay employed while searching for permanent housing solutions. In 2025, Oregon cities resumed large-scale RV removals after legal barriers were reduced through court decisions. Enforcement relies heavily on environmental, sanitation, and right-of-way codes, allowing authorities to cite RVs even when no criminal activity exists. Vehicles are tagged, issued short deadlines, and removed within days. Once towed, RVs are rarely recovered by their owners. Fees, repairs, and storage costs often exceed $5,000, instantly erasing both housing and personal savings. Unlike tents, RVs represent a major capital asset, and their loss accelerates complete economic collapse for occupants. Oregon's shelter system cannot absorb displaced vehicle dwellers. Many shelters restrict pets, couples, or people with medical needs that require accommodation. Rural areas offer virtually no alternatives, while coastal enforcement protects tourism zones from visible poverty. The state's approach replaces stability with forced mobility. RV residents lose jobs due to constant relocation requirements, then become categorized as chronically homeless despite having been housed weeks earlier inside functioning vehicles. Oregon's system criminalizes housing solutions rather than creating pathways to permanent shelter and stability. Nevada's RV homelessness is closely tied to extreme economic volatility in major cities. Las Vegas and Reno experienced sharp swings in hospitality, logistics, and construction employment. As rents climbed and work hours fluctuated, vehicle living increased among working adults who needed housing flexibility to survive unpredictable income patterns. In 2025, Clark County expanded enforcement targeting RVs near industrial parks, desert edges, and highway corridors. Officials cite safety, illegal dumping, and zoning concerns, even when vehicles are fully self-contained and legally parked. Enforcement often escalates from initial citations to immediate towing. Recovery costs range from $3,000 to $7,000, effectively eliminating housing in a single enforcement action. Nevada's extreme climate intensifies harm significantly. Summer temperatures regularly exceed 115 degrees Fahrenheit, making outdoor displacement extremely dangerous and potentially fatal. RVs provide essential shade, airflow, and refrigeration for life-sustaining medications, yet enforcement removes these critical protections. Cooling shelters are severely limited and frequently inaccessible to people with pets or significant belongings. Public land access is shrinking as counties restrict roadside parking and desert pull-offs previously used for temporary refuge. With few shelters and no statewide vehicle dweller protections, displaced individuals rapidly lose employment and fall into unsheltered homelessness. Nevada's system prioritizes visual clearance over long-term stability, accelerating the collapse of vehicle-based survival strategies. Once displaced, residents face nearly impossible odds of regaining housing without intervention. Utah's RV homelessness rose quietly as housing prices doubled over a single decade, while wages remained stagnant. By 2025, Salt Lake City rents surpassed $2,100 monthly, and layoffs across tech, construction, and retail sectors increased financial instability. RV living emerged among workers who could no longer bridge the widening gap between income and housing costs. Utah expanded enforcement through urban camping bans and restrictive parking ordinances. Sleeping in vehicles is increasingly classified as illegal camping, regardless of location or parking legality. RVs parked overnight face fines, relocation orders, and eventual towing actions. Shelter availability is severely limited and often incompatible with vehicle dwellers, especially couples and people with medical needs requiring accommodation. Utah's safe parking capacity is minimal compared to actual demand. Once an RV is removed through enforcement, individuals lose their only shelter and storage simultaneously. Utah's approach emphasizes rapid clearance to maintain city image and property values. Without sufficient affordable housing development, enforcement converts temporary vehicle shelter into long-term homelessness. The state records fewer visible encampments, but experiences higher rates of economic displacement and housing instability. Towing costs typically range from $3,000 to $5,000, making recovery impossible for low-income residents. Once displaced, families and individuals enter a cycle of street homelessness that is extremely difficult to escape. Utah's policy framework treats housing instability as a code enforcement problem rather than an economic crisis requiring comprehensive housing solutions and supportive services. Idaho experienced one of the fastest housing cost increases in the entire country. Boise area rents rose 30 to 40% in just a few years, driven by rapid in-migration and severely limited housing supply. Service workers, retirees, and fixed-income residents increasingly turn to RV living to remain near jobs and family networks. In 2025, Idaho cities expanded overnight parking bans and anti-camping ordinances throughout urban areas. Sleeping in vehicles is prohibited in many zones, including industrial areas previously tolerated by local authorities. Enforcement relies on parking duration limits and nuisance codes. Idaho offers extremely few shelters, especially outside major cities. Rural counties provide virtually no homeless services or emergency housing. RV dwellers pushed out of urban areas are forced into remote locations without water access, sanitation facilities, or emergency services. Winter temperatures regularly drop below freezing, making displacement dangerous and potentially deadly. RVs provide essential insulation and heating systems, yet enforcement removes these critical safeguards. Towing eliminates housing instantly, with recovery costs far beyond what low-wage workers can afford. Idaho's policy trajectory converts housing shortages into enforcement problems, replacing affordability solutions with forced invisibility. Once displaced, residents face nearly impossible odds of regaining housing stability. The state's approach prioritizes property values and tourism appeal over human welfare, accelerating the transition from temporary vehicle shelter to complete street homelessness. Without coordinated housing development and supportive services, Idaho's enforcement-only strategy increases long-term homelessness rather than resolving it. Montana's RV homelessness is driven less by urban collapse and more by severe housing supply shortages tied to rapid in-migration and tourism growth. Towns like Bozeman, Missoula, and Kalispell saw home prices rise over 60% in 5 years, while rental availability fell into single-digit vacancy rates. Service workers, seasonal employees, and retirees increasingly turned to RVs as their only viable housing option. In 2025, cities intensified enforcement to protect tourism optics and downtown redevelopment projects. Overnight parking restrictions and zoning enforcement are now used to remove RVs from city limits. Unlike larger states, Montana offers almost no shelter capacity, especially outside winter emergency periods. Seasonal layoffs worsen housing instability significantly. Tourism and construction employment drops sharply in shoulder seasons, leaving RV residents without income just as enforcement peaks. Cold weather adds serious survival risk. Winter temperatures routinely fall below 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and displacement often forces RVs into unplowed rural roads or isolated forest edges. Montana's vast land creates the illusion of available space, but most areas lack access to water, fuel, or emergency services. When RVs are sited or towed, recovery is nearly impossible due to long distances and limited impound access. Recovery costs typically exceed $4,000, making reclamation financially impossible. The state's approach preserves tourism image and land values while quietly pushing vehicle dwellers into increasingly dangerous isolation. Montana's enforcement converts temporary housing solutions into life-threatening displacement without offering alternatives. Georgia's RV homelessness has expanded alongside rising rents in metro Atlanta and surrounding suburban counties. Median rents increased 25% or more since 2021, while layoffs across logistics, warehousing, and media sectors left many households without stable income. RV living emerged among working adults attempting to stay near employment hubs. In 2025, counties increased encampment sweeps and zoning enforcement specifically targeting vehicles. RVs are frequently cited for improper use, sanitation violations, or commercial zoning infractions, even when legally parked on public streets. Repeated citations lead to removal orders or immediate towing. Georgia's shelter system is fragmented and often inaccessible to vehicle dwellers. Many shelters restrict length of stay, exclude couples, or require daytime exit, making employment maintenance extremely difficult. RV dwellers who lose their vehicles fall directly into street homelessness without transitional support. Suburban enforcement is especially aggressive, with coordinated actions between police departments and code enforcement officers. Once displaced, RV residents are pushed farther from public transit and employment centers, accelerating unemployment. Georgia's response prioritizes containment and relocation over housing stabilization. Towing costs range from $3,000 to $6,000, making vehicle recovery impossible for most low-income residents. Once an RV is lost, individuals lose shelter, transportation, and storage simultaneously. Georgia's approach quietly converts economic hardship into criminal enforcement issues, increasing long-term homelessness rather than providing pathways to housing stability and economic recovery. South Carolina's RV homelessness is closely tied to persistently low wages and rising housing costs in coastal and metro areas. Charleston, Greenville, and Myrtle Beach experienced rent increases exceeding 30% since 2020, while service sector wages remained near the national minimum. Retirees and seasonal workers increasingly turned to RVs as affordable housing. In 2025, enforcement expanded under public space management and tourism protection policies. Overnight parking bans and beach area restrictions are strictly enforced to maintain visual standards. RVs are removed to protect property values and tourism revenue, particularly in high-traffic zones. The state offers minimal shelter alternatives, and rural counties provide almost none. Displaced RV dwellers are often forced onto highway corridors or private lots they cannot afford long-term. Once an RV is sighted or towed, recovery costs quickly exceed personal savings. Hurricane season adds significant risk to enforcement policies. RV residents forced to move frequently cannot secure safe evacuation locations when storms threaten. South Carolina's enforcement strategy protects tourism revenue while exposing vehicle dwellers to environmental and economic danger without viable housing exits. Towing costs typically range from $2,500 to $5,000, making recovery financially impossible for most residents. Once displaced, individuals lose shelter, transportation, and belongings simultaneously. South Carolina's approach prioritizes visual management over human welfare, converting temporary housing solutions into permanent displacement. Without coordinated housing development, the state's enforcement-only strategy increases long-term homelessness and emergency service costs. Ohio's RV homelessness is linked directly to manufacturing and logistics layoffs across mid-sized cities, experiencing economic decline. Job losses combined with rising rents, up 20% or more in urban areas, pushed more people into vehicle living. RVs offered a temporary bridge for displaced workers seeking re-employment opportunities. In 2025, cities expanded camping bans and parking enforcement that specifically include vehicles. RVs parked overnight are ticketed under nuisance or obstruction codes. Repeat violations lead to towing and impound actions. Ohio's shelter capacity is insufficient, particularly for families and medically vulnerable individuals requiring accommodation. Many RV dwellers lose access to employment once displaced from stable parking locations, making rehousing significantly harder. Winter weather increases mechanical failures and health risks. Towing costs range from $2,500 to $5,000, making vehicle recovery impossible for most low-income residents. Once an RV is lost, individuals often enter long-term homelessness, actually increasing public costs rather than reducing them. Ohio's system moves people out of sight, but not into housing. The state's approach prioritizes visual management over comprehensive solutions. Without coordinated housing development and employment support, Ohio's enforcement strategy converts temporary vehicle shelter into permanent street homelessness. Recovery from RV loss is nearly impossible without significant financial assistance. Ohio's policy framework treats housing instability as a code enforcement problem rather than an economic crisis requiring intervention, increasing long-term displacement and emergency service utilization. Kentucky enacted a statewide ban on urban camping that fully impacts RV dwellers throughout 2025. Sleeping in vehicles is treated as unlawful camping in many jurisdictions. Enforcement is now consistent across cities, eliminating local tolerance zones previously used for temporary refuge. Layoffs across healthcare support, logistics, and manufacturing sectors combined with housing shortages pushed more residents into vehicles. RV living became a last defense against total homelessness for working families and fixed-income residents. Kentucky's shelter network is severely limited and uneven across regions. Many areas offer no year-round options for homeless residents. Once an RV is removed through enforcement, individuals lose shelter, transportation, and storage at once. Enforcement emphasizes legal compliance over survival needs, accelerating displacement without providing alternatives. Kentucky's approach replaces housing instability with criminal penalties, turning economic hardship into a cycle that is nearly impossible to escape without intervention. Towing costs typically range from $2,500 to $5,000, making vehicle recovery financially impossible for most residents. Once displaced, families enter street homelessness with few pathways to stability. Kentucky's policy framework prioritizes clearance over housing solutions. Without coordinated affordable housing development and supportive services, Kentucky's enforcement-only strategy increases long-term homelessness and associated public costs. The state's approach treats vehicle dwelling as a criminal issue rather than an economic crisis requiring comprehensive intervention and housing development. This isn't a future problem. It's already happening, and it's accelerating. If you or someone you know has been affected by RV crackdowns or job loss, share your story in the comments and watch our next video where we reveal the laws and enforcement moves that are about to change everything.